There's a version of Michael Jackson that the world knows completely. The moonwalk, the single white glove, the voice that came out of speakers in every country on earth and made people feel things they didn't have words for. The performer so total, so consuming, so fully realized that it became almost impossible to imagine him as anything other than what he was: inevitable, destined, born complete. But there was one night before all of that. One night when Michael Jackson stood in the dark at the edge of a stage, 12 years old, his hands shaking, his stomach hollow with fear, and thought, what if they don't want me without them? This is the story of that night. The decision that changed everything. By 1971, the Jackson 5 had done something that almost never happens in the music industry. They had delivered on the promise. The five brothers from Gary, Indiana, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael, had arrived at Motown Records in 1968 with everything to prove and nothing to lose. And in 3 years, they had become one of the most successful acts in America. 4 consecutive #1 singles, sold-out tours, a Saturday morning cartoon bearing their name. The kind of success that arrives fast and loud and changes everything it touches. At the center of it was Michael. He had always been at the center of it. From the beginning, even when he was 9 years old and the smallest figure on the stage, there was something in him that drew the eye and held it, a quality that veteran music executives, people who had seen everything, found themselves struggling to describe without reaching for words that sounded too large. Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown, had been watching Michael for 3 years. In the spring of 1971, he made a decision. He called a meeting. Not with all 5 brothers, just with their father, Joseph Jackson, and the label's management team. The meeting was straightforward. Motown believed Michael was ready for a solo career, not instead of the Jackson 5, alongside it, a parallel path, solo recordings, solo performances, solo billing. The decision was made by adults in a room. Michael was told afterward. He listened to the full explanation. He nodded at the appropriate moments. He asked one question: will my brothers be on stage with me? The answer was no. Michael nodded again. He said thank you, and he left the room. That night, he went to his brother's shared room and slept on the floor beside Jackie's bed, the way he had done when he was very small and the world felt too large. Who he was before the world knew him. Michael Joseph Jackson had been performing since he was 5 years old. This fact is repeated so often that it has lost its strangeness, but consider it properly. By the time he was 12, he had 7 years of professional performance behind him. He had stood on stages in front of thousands of people more times than most performers do in an entire career. He knew the particular electricity of a crowd responding, the specific physical sensation of music moving through a room and moving the people in it. But he'd never stood on a stage alone. Every performance of his life, every single one, had his brothers beside him. Jackie to his left usually, Marlon nearby. The 5 of them moving together, a unit, a system that had been calibrated over years of rehearsal rooms and cramped tour buses and shared hotel rooms. The group was not just his professional context, it was his emotional infrastructure. When a lyric landed wrong, he could feel Jermaine adjust beside him. When the crowd energy shifted, Marlon would catch his eye. When he was tired, genuinely tired, the bone-deep exhaustion of a child who had been working at an adult pace since he could read properly, Jackie would put a hand briefly on his shoulder between songs, and that was enough. The stage without his brothers was not just a professional challenge, it was an entirely different place.
The rehearsal days. The song chosen for Michael's first solo single was Gotta Be There, a quiet, melodic piece that asks something different of him than the Jackson 5 material, less kinetic energy, more emotional intimacy. A song that required him to stand relatively still and simply sing, which sounds simple and is the opposite of simple when you are 12 years old and stillness has never been your relationship with a stage. Rehearsals ran for 2 weeks. Michael learned the material completely. His musical memory was the kind that other musicians found slightly unnerving. He heard something once and it was inside him, permanent, available. The song was learned within days. The arrangements were understood intuitively. By the end of the first week, technically, he was ready. But the rehearsal room is not the stage. The rehearsal room is a controlled environment, familiar faces, no crowd, the freedom to stop and start. Michael moved through rehearsals with the focused efficiency he had always brought to work. He was professional in the way that children who have worked since childhood are professional, completely, almost disconcertingly so. At night, it was different. He barely slept. His appetite, never large, disappeared almost entirely. He was quiet in a way that his brothers recognized, not the comfortable quiet of someone at rest, but the compressed quiet of someone holding something in. Marlon asked him once during the second week if he was all right. Michael said yes. Marlon looked at him for a moment. "You don't have to be," he said. Michael said nothing, but something in his face shifted slightly, the specific involuntary relief of being seen accurately by someone who knows you. The night before. The performance was scheduled for a television taping, the kind of appearance that in 1971 carried enormous weight, broadcast into living rooms across America with the particular intimacy that television created, the sense of something happening just for you. The night before, Michael did not sleep. He lay in the dark and ran through every version of failure he could construct. The crowd that didn't respond, the note that didn't come, the silence where there should have been applause, that specific, devastating sound that performers describe as the worst sound in the world. But underneath those constructed fears was a simpler one, too honest to be dressed up in professional language. What if they don't want me without my brothers? The Jackson 5 had taught audiences to see five voices, 5 faces, 5 bodies moving in coordinated joy. The crowd's love was distributed across all of them. It arrived for the group and settled on each of them as part of the group. Alone, there was nowhere for it to land except on him. And 12-year-old Michael Jackson, lying in the dark the night before his first solo performance, was not sure he was enough of a surface for that. The day of. The production facility was a particular kind of organized chaos. Cameras, lighting rigs, crew members with clipboards moving in the specific urgent way of television production. Michael arrived with his family. His brothers were there, not as performers, not scheduled, not required to be present at all. They were there because it had not occurred to any of them not to be. Nobody had discussed it. There had been no conversation, no coordinated decision. Jackie had simply appeared that morning, then Tito, then Jermaine and Marlon. They occupied the space around Michael the way they always had, naturally, without ceremony, as if proximity was its own language. Michael's makeup was applied. His costume, a careful step away from the Jackson 5 aesthetic, individual, his own, was fitted and adjusted. He stood for photographs with the particular stillness of someone whose body is present and whose mind is elsewhere. 2 hours before the taping, he was taken to a holding area backstage. The room was small, a couch, a mirror, a water bottle on the table. The sound from the studio, the crew's movements, the distant testing of equipment, muffled through the walls. Jackie came in and sat beside him. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Michael said, "What if I forget who I am out there?" Jackie considered this with the particular seriousness that the question deserved. "You won't," he said, "because you've always been you. We were just standing next to you." Michael looked at his hands. "What if they don't?" "They will," Jackie said, not dismissively, with the specific certainty of someone who has been watching something true for 12 years and is tired of it being doubted.
The moment at the edge of the stage. 30 minutes before the taping, Michael stood in the wings. The stage was lit, the cameras were positioned, the studio audience, several hundred people, warm and expectant, filled the seats. The particular electricity of a live audience in an enclosed space was already building, that specific atmospheric pressure that performers learn to read the way sailors read weather. Michael stood at the edge of the curtain and looked at the stage. It was the same kind of stage he had stood on hundreds of times. Same dimensions, roughly, same lights, same microphone at the center, waiting. But it looked different. It looked very large and very empty and very far from where he was standing. His hands were shaking, not dramatically, a fine, continuous tremor that he tried to still by pressing his palms flat against his thighs. His breathing was shallow in the specific way that stage fright constricts breathing, the body preparing for something it has categorized as danger. A production assistant appeared beside him, clipboard in hand, and said something about timing, about cues, about what would happen when. Michael nodded. He heard none of it. He was looking at the microphone stand at the center of the stage, at the distance between himself and it, at the space on either side of it where his brothers were not standing. What his brothers did. Nobody had told them they could watch from the wings. Nobody had told them they couldn't. Jackie found the position first, stage left, just behind the curtain line, a clean sight line to the center stage. Within minutes, without coordination, without anyone saying a word, all four of them were there. Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, Jackie, standing in a line in the dark of the wings, looking out at the lit stage. When Michael appeared from the opposite wing and began walking toward the microphone, Marlon reached out and put his hand on Jackie's arm without looking at him. Jackie put his hand over Marlon's. None of them spoke. The walk to the microphone. It takes approximately 8 seconds to walk from the wing entrance to the center microphone of a stage that size. Later, in the rare moments when Michael spoke about that night, he would say that those 8 seconds were the longest of his life. He was aware of everything, the heat of the lights, the sound of the audience shifting as they registered his entrance, the specific texture of the stage floor under his feet, the microphone getting closer with each step. He was aware of his own heartbeat, which was very loud. He reached the microphone. He stood in front of it. The audience waited. The music began, the opening notes of Got to Be There, gentle and unhurried, giving him space to find himself inside it. He opened his mouth.
The moment. What came out was not what a frightened 12-year-old produces. What came out was something that the audience, several hundred people who had come to a television taping and expected to be reasonably entertained, was not prepared for. The voice was not the voice of a child performing. It was something older and more certain than that, something that seemed to arrive from a place that had nothing to do with age or experience or the fear that had been living in him for 2 weeks. It was a voice that knew, without knowing how it knew, exactly what it was doing. The first note silenced the room. Not the polite silence of an audience being attentive, the involuntary silence of people who have just heard something that has interrupted their normal processing, who have, without deciding to, stopped everything else they were doing because something is requiring their complete attention. By the second line, 3 people in the front row were crying. They could not have explained why, and that inexplicability was precisely the point. What the brothers saw. In the wings, Jackie felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized he was holding. Tito turned away from the stage and pressed his back against the wall and closed his eyes. Not because he didn't want to watch, because it was too much to watch straight on, the way certain kinds of light require you to look slightly away. Marlon's grip on Jackie's arm tightened. Jermaine said one word, very quietly, to no one in particular. There he is. Not there he goes, not there he is performing, there he is. As if the stage had not created something new, but simply revealed something that had always been present, had stripped away the surrounding context and shown them the specific, irreducible truth of their youngest brother. The person who had always been there, standing next to them. After. When Michael walked off stage, his brothers were waiting. The audience was still responding,
the particular sustained applause of people who have witnessed something they weren't expecting and are trying to express an emotion that applause is not quite adequate for. Michael came off the stage and walked directly into Jackie's arms. Neither of them said anything. Then Tito, then Jermaine, then Marlon. 5 brothers in the dark of the wings while the audience on the other side of the curtain was still clapping for one of them. After a while, Michael stepped back. His eyes were wet. He looked at each of them. "I didn't forget who I was," he said. Jackie looked at him steadily. "No," he said, "you didn't." What that night made. Michael Jackson went on to release Got to Be There as his debut solo single in October 1971. It reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was the beginning of a solo catalog that would eventually include Off the Wall, Thriller, Bad, Dangerous, History, a body of work that reshaped what popular music was capable of being. None of it would have happened without that first walk across a stage. None of it would have happened without the 8 seconds between the wing and the microphone when a 12-year-old boy carried his fear all the way to the center of a lit stage and then opened his mouth and let something larger than the fear come through. His brothers stood in the wings for every major solo performance after that. Not always. Logistics, their own careers, the complications of adult life intervened. But when they could be there, they were there. Because they had seen what happened when he walked out alone, and they wanted to be close to it. The final word. The world has spent 50 years trying to explain Michael Jackson, the talent, the instinct, the specific quality of his presence that made ordinary physics seem slightly negotiable when he was performing. Most of those explanations begin with the moonwalk, or Thriller, or the 1983 Motown 25 performance that a television audience of 47 million people watched and immediately needed to tell someone about. But the real beginning was earlier than all of that. It was a 12-year-old boy walking 8 seconds across a stage with his hands shaking, choosing to open his mouth anyway. Discovering in the specific privacy of that moment, just him and the microphone and the waiting room, that the thing he was afraid of losing had been inside him the whole time. His brothers had been standing next to it. The stage just showed him where it lived. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the thing you're most afraid to do alone might be exactly what you were born to do. Leave a comment below. What was the moment you surprised yourself? We read every single one.